Yeah. Okay. That's recording, right? I hope so. Let me just check. Yes, it's recording. Okay, cool. Yeah, so if at any stage you've got a question, you can use that sort of little raise your hand feature, and if I notice it, I'll stop and I can take your questions. I'm happy to be interrupted as we go through, but yeah, just be conscious that for this, most of my talking, I'll record it and I'll stop at the end. So today I'm just going to talk very briefly about reflective writing generally, right? So this is not about the individual assessment task for this unit. So I'm not going to be talking through what you need to do for that. But here, I really just wanted to talk about reflective writing, as a practice. What is it? And I was sort of really prompted to do this after talking to one student last semester, where she hadn't done very well on the reflective writing, but she didn't really know what reflective writing was, and was really just wanting some advice about how to approach it. And I just sort of thought, well, that's probably something that might be useful for everybody, right? So as I go through this, I'm really pitched at a basic level. So if you've done well for reflective pieces before, you maintain a journal, you're quite comfortable with reflective writing, by all means, stick to the process that you're familiar with. But if this is something which you've never done before, or you're just really not confident about what you're doing, here I'll just describe really one approach you can take to reflective writing. So there are others, but I think this is a relatively good, relatively easy approach to first adopt. So essentially, I'm just going to go through really just three main components. So firstly, just to talk a little bit about what reflective writing actually is, and then go into how you might approach producing some reflective writing of your own. And then finally, towards the end, just a little tip on how do you maybe assess your own writing, and not so much of like assessing down to like specifically what grade you might get, but just something, a technique you can use to go back and almost reflect on your reflective writing to see, am I really covering all the main things I need to have in any piece of reflective writing, whether as for an assessment task or just for your own personal growth. Reflective writing is something which can help as you go through your career, particularly as you navigate difficult things and difficult problems, to make sure you're not repeating the same mistakes over and over. Actually, our week 12 case, there's some good examples there of some people who maybe should be doing a little bit more reflecting. So when we talk about reflective writing, it's really just the written expression of just reflecting, which basically just means looking back at the past and trying to learn from what's happened before. And the big idea is then that this may be able to inform and help us make better decisions in the future, right? And so at a big picture, we can even look at, from a historical context, what's gone on before. We don't have to even necessarily always, reflective writing doesn't have to be just about yourself. It can be about society, a country, those sort of things. But for your reflective writing at university, it's generally going to be very personal. So we're looking back at the past and trying to identify what happened, and then what can we learn from this. So the first thing you want to do in your reflective practice, hold on, I just might mute someone. Thinky, I'll just mute you, okay? You can unmute yourself later. So the first thing you want to do when you're reflecting is to look back at the past and sort of draw from some experiences, right? So some things that have happened to you or things that you've witnessed. Now, in doing this, you're basically asking those basic journalistic questions, who was present or who was involved, what actually happened, where did it take place, and when. So this is the descriptive part. And so most reflective writing will often sort of start with a description of, one or more experiences. Now, one of the things, I guess, to warn you, if in any reflective assessment task in particular, is it's very easy to put too much effort into looking back at those experiences, the descriptive side. So particularly if you've got a small word count, this is something you want to be reasonably concise with. While it's essential, you can't do reflective writing without looking back and drawing upon past experiences. It's something which this is pretty low level in terms of the thinking that maybe an assessor would be looking at. So drawing from the experiences, yes, enough detail to describe them, but just be careful that you don't end up writing, 2/3 about these past experiences. You want to make sure that you keep it under control. How much detail, how many words you spend describing the experiences that took place. So this is your first key element. And this later, when I talk about the process, this is where you'll probably spend a lot of time initially, in the first stage, at least, of your reflective writing. So first thing, looking back at the past, trying to describe, understand some experiences. The next thing you want to do is where we start to actually begin our reflective process is you want to now analyze those past experiences. And so by this, I mean, you're trying to look back and understand how those past experiences affected you, what impact did they have on you? So there are, not all of these questions are relevant, right? It depends upon what past experience you're drawing from. But the sort of questions I would ask myself would be like, okay, that thing that happened to me or that thing that I was involved with, that experience, how does it maybe connect to other past experiences? Maybe things that happened in my childhood or other experiences, other workplaces, other relationships. Are there any, I guess, overlaps or connections between them, right? So maybe there's a pattern you can see emerging from your past experiences. Okay, so that's relatively easy. Now, the second thing you might try to do, and it's not going to apply to every experience, and this is where you're starting to get a bit deeper, is how did those experiences challenge your pre-existing beliefs, right? So you thought something should happen one way, you thought other people believed this, you thought this was the right way to do things, but actually what happened sort of challenged what you believe was important or what your values were. Maybe someone else's behavior, or some other situation, is not how you would have handled the same situation. And so maybe the next thing to sort of think about is trying to identify what did you believe should have happened or would happen, and maybe where you were wrong. And so then you might start talking about, or at least consider, how did that experience make you feel, right? Having your beliefs challenged for some people is quite confronting, might make them angry. Other people might react in a totally different way and think, well, actually, that's a better way of thinking about this. So what was your feeling? And has this experience really changed what you believe about yourself? So essentially here our first step was to go back and look at past experiences and sort of get an understanding of what happened, who did they happen to, where did they happen, etc. This next step in analyzing is you're trying to really work out, well, how does this actually affect you? Why was this past experience significant? So ultimately what we're trying to do in the later two steps is try to identify those experiences, how they changed us. Are there lessons we can learn from that? Is it potential that those past experiences may be beneficial and help guide our thinking and development in the future? And yeah, so I think that's what I'm going to have in the next step. Yeah, future. So then the third element is based upon this reflective process, how your beliefs were questioned and how you were made to feel uncomfortable and the emotional reaction you had in the short term versus the long term. The next part of your reflective writing is to think about, well, based upon this, could I have handled that situation differently? If I was in the same situation again, reflecting back and thinking about that experience, am I maybe able to better handle that situation now? So essentially what you're trying to do with it when you're thinking about the future is trying to pull out those lessons from those experiences which might help you when facing challenges in the future, right? Rather than just repeating the same mistakes, the same sort of patterns. So when we talked about reflective writing or just being reflective generally, these are the three big components, right? What's your experience? Analyzing that experience, and then what could we do? What have we learned from that? How can we maybe change in the future? All right. So we talk about reflective writing. So these are the three, I guess, components. Now, in terms of actually writing, I'm going to talk about a process you can take. All right. So this is you don't have to follow this process. There are other ways. I'm sure if you Google around, you can find other people who are maybe with more expertise than me, who might be able to give you a different approach. But this is a process you can take to start to then take these ideas and express them in written form. So the first step I would take is just take some time to brainstorm. All right. And so by this, I just mean that just thinking about past experiences. Now, this is a step which doesn't require, it's a step where you can try to sit down to do it, but it's probably something where you might sit down and brainstorm for ideas about past experiences and try to make connections between them. How do they relate to each other? But if I was you, rather than spending an hour doing this, I would spend like 15 minutes on this and then take a break. And then maybe the next day come back to it for another 15 minutes. And sometimes just breaking it up and just having it sort of sit in the background of your mind, you might be able to identify some more interesting experiences to use. I'll just mute you as well, just for now. And where's my eyesight's too bad. I don't want to make you the host. Okay. Yeah, so this brainstorming stage, rather than just thinking of this as a single exercise, I just break it up into several small brainstorming sessions. Just so you might not think of something that really interesting experience the first time, but it doesn't need to be, you don't need to spend a lot of time brainstorming. I just break it up. The second step, so I would brainstorm. I'd start doing that almost today, right? After this meeting, spend 15 minutes, try to think of some experiences, put it aside, and then come back to it later and try to expand upon that. The second step is, once you've gathered together a few different experiences which you think might be the basis of your reflective writing, is to try and interpret those experiences. So going through the experiences that you've identified during your brainstorming session, I'd be just making a note about, well, how did those different experiences make me feel? Are they related to each other? Do I notice that, okay, there's several experiences which are around the same sort of theme? And how did they make you feel? So particularly, I would think those experiences which have maybe a stronger effect on you, a stronger emotional reaction, those ones that make you upset or happy or angry, those stronger emotions are likely to be the ones which we might choose to focus on in our reflective writing. So there's our first two steps. We've brainstormed for ideas, for experiences. We've sort of thought through, well, how did those experiences affect us? Now, the key to good reflective writing is more in the next two steps. So step 3 of my process is to start to try and evaluate these experiences. So far we've identified what they are, how do they make us feel or think at the time. So one of the things I would ask myself is about each of those experiences, has that experience been beneficial or useful to you? Now, this doesn't mean that it was necessarily a nice experience, right? So sometimes something that's very negative and really hurts you at the time is something which in the long term, then maybe it is beneficial or useful, right? So, breaking up with a girlfriend or boyfriend at the time is really painful and it hurts. But in hindsight, when we come back and we analyze it, we might realize, well, actually that person really wasn't that good for me. So something that's painful can be still beneficial. So try not to conflate. So here we're not looking for just necessarily happy experiences, but experiences that help shape our thinking. So another aspect of our our analyzing step is, well, what have you learned from this? So what insights have you gained? So in particular, what were you maybe not aware of when you went through that experience, but now having that experience, what do you know now that you didn't know then? Particularly what might be useful to you. Now, as you go through this analyzing part, how do I say this? It might hurt, right? Really good reflective writing is sometimes quite uncomfortable. Sometimes you learn that things about yourself that you'd rather not know, right? Sometimes you realize in that situation that, well, maybe I was the bad guy. Maybe it wasn't that other person's fault, or maybe I was too quick to judge. And actually my reaction really hurt somebody. So it's okay going through this reflective process. If you think in this analyzing section, you begin to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Often very good reflective writing is getting at those things which your brain would rather just push aside and pretend that are not there. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to recognize maybe some of those uncomfortable truths so that we don't repeat the same negative behaviors in the future. And this is how we grow and we get better. Okay. And then the fourth component of your writing is more about the planning stage, right? So this is, okay, now that we've learned this stuff, now that I've recognized that maybe I didn't handle that situation that well, maybe I had these faulty assumptions, and maybe my beliefs, I thought this, but actually I realized that maybe my beliefs should change. Now, the next thing we want to include in our writing is, well, going forward in the future, what have I gathered from this exercise that may help me make better decisions in the future, or change my behavior in the future, or change my ambitions in the future? And so these are your four real elements, I would think, of good reflective writing, is that identifying the experiences, thinking about interpreting how did they affect you, and really analyzing them. Then that's where you're starting to become really actually reflective, and then projecting into the future. Well, okay, now that I've learned this, how will the future be different? Okay, so those are your four elements, I think, for good reflective writing. So in terms of advice, I think a useful framework for thinking about your own writing, if you're going back to review it yourself, is really to look at those four elements. Have I described what the experience or experiences were? Have I interpreted them? How did they affect me? Have I evaluated them? And then have I thought about, well, now that I know this, how might the future be different? Now, if we're thinking about for an assessment, different assessors may put different weightings on different elements. And I can tell you that I'm not the one who's going to be reading and marking your reflective writing. But to me, what I'm really looking for are these elements, the evaluation and planning. So this is really where the real reflection is happening. So describing what the experience is, what happened, that's essential, right? You have to do that as part of your reflection. You've got to have something to draw from. But this is the easiest part. Interpreting how it affected you, okay, that's what a lot of people do in the moment. But the real insights come from the evaluation and planning stage. So just make sure that you're putting enough weighting on those. So for me, that doesn't necessarily mean that that these make up 75% of the writing. They might still only be 25% each, but just make sure that you don't overlook them, because these are the two that I think are particularly important. So a method that I have used is to color code my writing, right? So I finish writing that reflective piece, and then I just go back and just with a different color, how much of the piece of the essay is really describing something that happened? How much is it me interpreting? How much is evaluating? How much is planning? And so something often as simple as just color coding the paragraphs really highlights to you that, okay, all four colors look roughly equal. Okay, this looks okay. Or maybe you realize that, okay, maybe I use yellow for evaluating. Oh, there's only like 2 sentences here where I'm really evaluating. But I've got, half a page of green, maybe the describing or something like that. And so sometimes just color coding your writing might be a way just to visually look at, okay, am I actually addressing each of these four components? The other thing with reflective writing is this is something that's very personal, and it's honest, and it's critical, right? So you're not trying to be too like theoretical or just paint like this perfect picture. It is something that is quite personal, and it's something which really having someone else read it is uh, not really the point. Ideally, reflective writing is something you might write just for yourself and never show anyone else. But yeah, it is an assessment task, so yeah, Christo will read it. But you should be trying to make it as personal and honest as you can. And so, in making sure your writing is personal, just look through the language that you're using. Is it about you? Is it personal? So when I sort of see these sort of phrases like I found, I felt, it reminded me, it gave me, I need to, I'm interested in developing, I hope. These type of phrases where, there's I and me is the center point of the sentence each time. Okay, that shows that this is, okay, it is about you. So you try not in your writing to talk too much about what other people should do differently or how. So maybe you're in describing the past experience. Yes, you're talking about other people, environments, those sort of things. But when you're coming to those other three elements, it's about you, right? And it's okay. Yeah, and as I said before, it's should make you feel a bit uncomfortable, right? It's something which it's if it's too comfortable and you feel okay, this was easy and I'm happy with what I wrote, I'm happy with myself as a person, that's good, that's great for you. But in terms of reflecting, it's unlikely that you've really pulled out or identified something that can actually help you be a better person in the future. So it should be a bit uncomfortable, a bit confronting about some of your own limitations and flaws as you went through those experiences, but that's okay, right? It's what you're trying to do is not put yourself down. We all make mistakes. We all handle things poorly, and we all misunderstand other people's intentions, and so this is something which we can which we're hoping to learn from and basically improve in the future. Hey, Lucy, you've got a question.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I think I basically have two questions. The first
Yeah.
question is, the thing was from my previous experience, I think it's hard for me to firstly, when I try to go through like 2000 word or something, it's hard to identify like which one is the descriptive statement, which one is the analysis. And my second question is I feel like because the reflective writing it needs like 50, 60 or 70% of analysis, I feel like hard to, deepen the analysis part. Okay, this is the experience and then how I feel and then what I got from them. And then I think like I end up with like just like
Yeah,
yeah.
Lucy, well, you're right. That is the hardest part. The analysis part is the hardest. So in distinguishing between them, the descriptive part is where you're describing something in a more almost like a more objective way. All right. So I was there with James and Yudi, and there was this argument that happened. Yudi thought this, I thought this, and then there was and so you're just describing something, right? So it's not, but then when you start to the get into the analysis part, it's more about you, right? So recognizing the what you believed and maybe the mis it's starting you're starting to get more personal about you. So the descriptive is something which is almost like a newspaper article, right? You could sort of see like a journalist who observed what happened, they could describe what happened. That's the descriptive part. When we're moving past what happened to more about how it impacted you, and your sort of internal feelings about it and your internal thinking, what you thought. But now in hindsight, when you come back and think about it again, maybe how you could have handled this differently. That's where you're starting to get into the analysis part. So Lucy, that's not easy. It's the hardest part. All right. So for this, right, you're a student, you're learning. So I guess I'd sort of say you don't hold yourself to like this perfect standard. You just try to make some steps down this path. And this reflecting and analyzing is something which is it's very difficult for some people, and for some people it's quite intuitive, right? So some people have always been quite reflective. They've written diaries and sort of gone back and looked at the past a lot, and other people don't do that. We're just sort of we're in the situation. What do I do? What do I do now? There's not as much thinking about the past, but that's okay. So Lucy, you're just coming from wherever you are, and you're just trying to make a step towards trying to analyze a bit more. All right. Yeah. So don't hold yourself to that standard of perfection. It's unrealistic. If your reflecting ability is down here, and then maybe the advice I can give you gets you up to here, that's great. It doesn't matter that it's not perfect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but my previous experience was like, okay, I gonna write reflective writing for other unit, and then I have to try to, how to say that? Oh, I try to create some story about, like reflecting teamwork. Okay, so yeah, I feel like it's hard to, yeah, just like another thing is if we need to do like reflection on the teamwork or something,
So for this
how
one,
to
like
have the
you don't have
awareness.
to reflect on the teamwork. I think I put that in as an example, just because everybody's done a team assignment, right? So it's just a common experience that, okay, so maybe there's some experiences there that there's conflict in the group or something. But you can draw from your work experience, might be really good, right? Because I know that you've got that work experience about, and how, and maybe there are some things that, if you were starting today, well, I would hope today that you're a better employee than you were on day one, right? And the reason you were a better employee today is maybe, yes, you might have more technical knowledge, but maybe there are some other things, just how you interact with people and understand better the expectations of customers, managers, co-workers, those sort of things. So maybe there's some experiences there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, all right. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so I use the team assignment as an example just because it's common to everybody. And I know, but those who have work experience, other sorts of experiences, it's okay to draw from them too. Yeah. But yeah, Lucy, just try, right? And you're just trying to improve yourself. And that's almost what you're doing with reflective writing, is you're being reflective now, right? As you ask that question, right? I can see you're thinking back to past experiences, right? Past experiences you had to do, reflect some sort of reflective piece. And I struggled with that. All right. So they actually you're being reflective, in that your question is sort of an indication of someone who's starting to try to be reflective, reflecting on those past experiences. I thought I was doing the right thing. The feedback I got maybe was that I wasn't, or maybe I found it really hard. And then now you're trying to sort of go back and sort of analyze that and think, well, in the future, what could I do different? So maybe one of the things you could do is to ask someone like me, right? That the question that you did. So actually you've been engaged in reflective thinking right there in your question. So what did I get up to? Yeah, so it's reflective writing should be a bit uncomfortable. It should be difficult, not in terms of like intellectually or necessarily even time consuming, but it'll hurt your brain a little bit. You do have to sort of really just try to think a bit deeper and a bit more critically about yourself. And maybe that's something that is a bit new. And then finally, this is more just about writing generally, sort of unconscious that team assignments are coming up as well. more for assessment tasks, I'm thinking here, right? If you're writing reflectively for yourself, don't bother doing this. Just do your reflection and just maintain your journal, and nobody else sees it, so it doesn't matter. But writing generally, one thing, it's a conversation, I would have more with research students in particular who are doing, trying to produce high quality writing, is that nobody is a perfect writer. And what makes someone a good writer is that they recognize that writing is this iterative process. So what that means is you don't, it's not something you just do once. It's something you do and then you come back to it and try to improve it. So assignments is about you're doing your research, making a plan about what you're going to do. Then once you've done your plan, you realize, okay, there are some limitations to the plan I had. I need to go back and do some further research, update my plan. And then we might start writing, and then I'll read what I wrote and I'll realize, okay, that's okay, but this doesn't really make sense. I'll go back, I'll edit that, I'll rewrite it. Then I might share it with someone else to get their feedback on it and write it again. So just with writing, I think particularly students from overseas, which I think is most of you, often I think there's this perception that, hey, a local person's writing is just perfect, and they got this big advantage. I don't know, even maybe it's part of the education. So when I was in high school, we go through this process. You write something, you get feedback on it, you come back and you redo it. And that's how you improve your writing, is you just keep going and trying to improve it several times. Yeah, so I think, oh yeah, my last slide just says I'm finished. So I can close that. I saw there was a question. Let me see. Well, a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah. Yeah, so Ziyan, yeah, what you've mentioned there, maybe, yeah, there might be something interesting in that, right? So there you, so it's secret, right? Which it's not
No,
everyone's. Ziyan
it's
just
okay.
emailed
It's
me,
okay.
so it's
I just type it down just in case I forgot what I'm gonna say. So it's
yeah,
fine.
okay. Make
You
sure you
can
keep a
say
copy. So
the
I won't talk about necessarily what you specifically written, but yeah, my scanning through it is about, you've identified you had a pre-existing belief and it's been challenged. And then
yes.
you're just sort of questioning, well, does it mean that my belief is foolproof and 100% right? Or maybe I can step it back that, okay, maybe, yeah, I'm 99% right or 95%, but maybe actually I can get to a more nuanced position. So yeah, those sort of things are sort of things you can identify.
Okay, thanks.
So then, and Becky, your question is not so personal. So your question was, you gave us a writing framework. Should we write each experience with this framework independently or mix all the experiences influenced together? So Becky, what I would do is in that first step where we're trying to, when you're coming up with all of your experiences that you might talk about, you might identify sort of 10 maybe, or 6 or 4. I would just choose the ones that are maybe related to each other. And really you're just talking about maybe there's a theme, right? So it could, you could just draw on a single, you could just draw on a single experience, or you might say, you might recognize it. Okay, hold on, this experience, maybe there was something similar happened to me, 2 years ago, right? Or when I was a child. And so maybe there is a little group of experiences, and these are the ones you want to reflect on. But yeah, I don't, particularly because you've got a very limited word count, don't try to have reflecting on 6 separate, 1 paragraph reflections. You're trying to get deeper. So yeah, look at a collection of experiences. It's not about the volume, right? So it's more about, if there are 2 or 3 experiences which are similar, where there is the same sort of thing happening when your belief has been challenged and you've reacted very negatively and it's harmed a relationship and later you've regretted it, right? So maybe that's happened to you, 2 or 3 times. And so there you might draw on all of those experiences. But yeah, so don't apply this framework for them separately. Really just doing one reflective essay. So you're doing that description again, trying to keep that. Don't go into too detail about don't use too many words up for the description, because the evaluation part is more important. Let me just put up one other thing. This sort of looks like a movie where the government sort of redacted all the confidential information. But I just put up, this is a reflective essay from another student, right? And I've blocked off a lot of things because I don't think the details are important. But I just wanted to show you that how this student approached it, right? So, so there are words under all the blacked out squares. So the person, you can sort of see that. Well, I've probably blocked off too much. So they begin talking about, there's a little introduction, which you don't need to do. And they start describing some event, right? So they're describing, okay, something that happened, right? So this would be an example of descriptive writing. And then they're starting to analyze it, right? So, okay, on the surface is what happened, but in reality, the thinking back, reflecting on it, the stuff that we didn't work. People became stressed. It was quite frustrating. And then they've, changing colors. They recognize that they're starting to analyze that what they've realized or learned from this experience, maybe linking it back to pre-existing beliefs. So this person was from a Chinese background, talking about, well, what they thought before and their assumptions. And then they are starting to think about, well, maybe there was a different way of interpreting what happened, or maybe I was wrong or misinterpreted things that were told to me in the past, right? So my interpretation, what my elders intended for me to grasp, and maybe I didn't interpret those things correctly. So they've been a bit critical here. And then they're starting to think about, well, okay, based upon that, well, how could I apply this insight to the future, right? So I've blocked off a lot of stuff, so you can't really tell what they were actually talking about. But I just wanted to highlight this as an example. I can see that, okay, the student's being descriptive, and then they started to analyze, and then they're starting to question themselves, so going back and rethinking, and then they're planning for the future. Okay, but you can see there's this color coding. Anyway, that's all. Yeah. So I might stop the recording here.